50 minutes before 11 o'clock as we continue here on Mind, Body and Soul. Our guest in studio, Amanda McIntyre, co-director at WOMANTRA, and we thank her again for having this discussion with us today. Thank you so much for being here. Really, really a pleasure meeting you. Amanda, on the topic of violence, and I want to just shift a little bit. But in Trinidad and Tobago itself, the amount of violence that we see perpetrated against women are not necessarily within the domestic framework, but just on a whole, socially. Just a couple of days ago, we learned about this missing woman, 74-year-old, I think she may have been a Trini American, came to Trinidad, family in the States trying to get in touch with her, couldn't get in touch with her. They fly down here to see what's up. Next thing you know, her body is being discovered somewhere in the back of Camp Camuto. We spoke about the young schoolgirl who was discovered strangled and all of this violence against women. What do you think that speaks to here in Trinidad and Tobago in terms, socially? Is it about the state that we're in financially and otherwise? What is going on in the country at this moment? What is WOMANTRA's perspective on this?
Well, people hate when I use the term rape culture, and over the years I have understood that anytime I use it, I need to explain exactly what it means. Because when you say culture, I have found that the average person thinks of culture as carnival, steel pan, and some other art form. But culture really, according to sociologists, is your collected norms and values. And here we have a culture that has supported certain things. One of the unfortunate things that our culture has supported is violence towards women and girls.
Okay, in what way has the culture supported that?
By sanctioning it. So communities sanction this. Let me give you an example. I was in Londonville, Chaguanas, in August. And I wrote about this recently for the Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I was in Londonville, and this man just came bolting down the streets, shouting out, "My wife wanted me, my wife wanted me, my wife wanted me," right? Okay. Someone on the streets, I don't know if he knows the person, how much history they have, but the person turns to him and says, "Your wife wanting you, what it is you want? A drink or a firearm?" This happened in front of me. And I would use this as an illustration of how communities sanction violence towards women and girls. People think of it as a way in which women and girls should be kept in place. People think of it as ways in which men can assert not only their authority, but also assert their entitlement towards others. And this culture, of course, is supported by our very long history of violence. Apart from this being a phenomenon that is noted internationally, within Trinidad and Tobago, within the Caribbean region, we have a particular history of violence in terms of colonialism and in terms of just how bodies were treated, that certain bodies were thought of as being less than, and violence was used as a way to keep that stratification, that social stratification in place. And further to colonialism, there was the phenomena of indentureship that just extended ideas that certain bodies were to be treated in certain ways. So apart from this, of course, being race-based, within our society, it became gender-based as well, because it was just an extension. So violence being used as a way to sanction the way in which people are treated racially extended into how people were treated in terms of their gender. It extended into how people are treated in terms of class. It extends into how we treat people because of age. Parents think that they have a right to beat up the child because the child is their own, and because the child living in their house. So even though we talk about corporal punishment in schools and...
but a lot of that has changed since then.
A lot of that has changed.
Many like yourself, thought that it was an old mindset and it never really resolved anything, and we had to find different approaches to deal with these issues, yeah? Because if we were to buy that argument as well, I would then proffer, then how do you explain male-on-male violence in Trinidad and Tobago, black male on black male, you know, with the perpetuation of gang violence and all of that. So I think it's really all-encompassing, maybe as opposed to just gender-based. Would you agree?
Well, and this is one of the values I feel of a day like International Men's Day. Now, I honestly don't feel that this is necessary, International Men's Day, and I've spoken about this before, but if it is going to happen, I feel that the people involved need to talk about certain things exactly like this question. Like, how is the violence that happens between men and other men distinct from gender-based violence? That is one question I feel they could address one time, because it is a conversation that men need to have with men. The violence that men execute towards other men doesn't happen because they are men. It happens because of other reasons. But with women, the violence is because this is a woman. Because she's a woman, I feel I must treat her in this way. All right? She shouldn't deny me access to her body. She shouldn't speak to me in certain ways. She should have certain things present to accommodate me. And if these issues are not met, my violence towards her is justified. That is the thinking, you know. And it is the thinking that is gendered. And this is why it is distinct from general violence.
Don't you not think that a lot, you know, we talk about a lot of these things that we see playing out on social media and so on. Do you not think that a lot of these instances, especially recently, many of the aggressors turn out to be females?
Do you have a specific case?
Yeah. Even if you look at the schools, about the schools, a lot of these fights that you see going on, it's usually between the girls, more so than the males now. At one time we could have said that, but there seems to be some sort of preponderance where this is concerned, especially within the last couple of years. I see Steve shaking his head, because it's something that I've noticed,
right,
where women are actually now the aggressors,
right,
as opposed to men.
I'm glad that you're talking about this, because it is a conversation that requires its own space. And it goes back to what I was saying before about in Trinidad and Tobago and the region, we have this history of violence that is supported by colonialism. So people think of resolving issues, and despite the many alternatives that we have, violence is the option that we often resort to. And just as we were saying previously, in terms of men's violence towards other men, we also have to talk about women's violence towards other women. And not just within the school system, we have to talk about within the LGBT community, for example. We have men being aggressive towards other men, and this being based on gender. We have women being aggressive towards other women, and this being based on gender. There has also been instances, and people love to talk about this, in which gender-based violence within the home, with the woman as the aggressive party and the man as the receiver of it, and several implications for that in terms of how that is represented and how men feel about the treatment they have received at police stations. So all of these are conversations that we need to have. But what it goes back to an issue of violence, and just the fact that we need to just continually talk about this, and that all these discussions require their own space. This is why I said just now, a great use of International Men's Day could be to talk about exactly this.
Yeah. Well, certainly more conversations, as you say, to be had, and unfortunately we're out of time to have any more of them. But we can certainly set another space and time for us to actually delve into that a little further.
Yes.
But Amanda, I want to thank you so much for being here today. It was certainly a pleasure.
And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
And I hope that we could talk further, especially about the project I refer to, the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Education for Empathy and Equality, and WOMANTRA is a partner on this project.
There you go. There you have it. So Mind, Body and Soul for the day, Thursday, November 22 here on Power 102. I'm Stanley Augustus. Thank you so much for the pleasure of your company. Passing it over to Sir Charles.